Hello and welcome to Interfaith Connections. I am your host, Jackie Fuller. Today we are discussing interfaith youth and young adults. And I have through Skype today, Tahil Sharma. He is an interfaith activist based in California, and he's going to share his stories and some perspectives on living the life of someone who comes from two faiths. Hi, Tahil. Welcome to the show. Welcome back.
Hi, Jackie. Thank you so much. Glad to be back.
All right. So just for the people who have not had a chance to meet you, can you give some brief background information about yourself?
Sure, no problem. I'm a native of Southern California. I come from a Hindu and a Sikh family. My mom's side of the family is Sikh. My dad's family is Hindu. And they raised me in both faith traditions, and I've kind of learned to live with it.
Okay. So what was it like for you growing up, being a child from two traditions? Was it split between you learning both faiths? Was there one faith that was preferred to be practiced in the household? What was that like?
Well, my parents were actually very lenient when it came to that kind of thing. They basically introduced me to both of the faith traditions and told me, this is what we grew up with, this was what our upbringing was based on, and it's your choice if you want to follow them or not. Mm-hmm. But because I have that flexibility, I actually had a greater curiosity about how these traditions impact my life, and how, more importantly, other people from different traditions want to see religion, spirituality, and philosophy accordingly. So it ended up being a really enriching experience, and over time it became a conclusion that I would be accepting both faith traditions in a very deep, intrinsic, and powerful way.
And how does that affect you up until now, with things happening in your life or with the work that you're doing? How did it transcend from what you experienced growing up to now?
I think with a lot of what's going on in politics, I think with a lot of injustices that are taking place all over the world, I always look to my spiritual roots to try to understand what the basis is of trying to overcome these obstacles. And coming from a Hindu and a Sikh background to me means my imperative is always going to strive for service. It's striving for the equity and justice of all people that I'm trying to work for. And sometimes it requires that rediscovery of values that are shared across the board with people who are also not Hindu and Sikh. It really means connecting with them on a deeply altruistic level and understanding that we want to experience life together. We want to be able to live in stability. And it actually requires us to get into a zone of discomfort when we want to learn about others and when we want to help them.
Mm-hmm. And did you face any challenges or discrimination because of your having the connection of two faiths? Did people maybe outside your family circle felt like, no, you should be this, or no, you should be this?
I had a couple of family members who expressed condemnation when my parents got married, and over time they became used to the idea of sort of having them together and then sort of me being one of the products of that marriage. But instead of discrimination, it was more of the confusion and apprehension that I got from people who really thought that religion was a very monolithic thing. It was very much a structure that was focused on a single basis of ideas and practices and norms. And they would always keep asking the same questions everyone else does, that again, which one do you choose over the other? How do you make it balance out? Don't people accuse you of being in a bad position because you can't make up your mind? Mm-hmm. And to me, both these faith traditions are so deeply a part of my life. It's like asking me if I blink my left eye more than my right eye. They're equally and deeply a part of the being that I am today.
Mm-hmm. So what was it like for you during holidays or any kind of religious celebrations?
Holidays and religious celebrations were more something that I did personally rather than in direct community. I never really connected with a lot of the Hindu and Sikh temples in my area only because my curiosity was very deeply theological and less sociocultural. So over time, when I wanted to be in community, I started to learn how important that was, that I joined these practices, these community prayers, and the ability to break bread with my own people. And it made me realize how valuable it was to have that kind of community when it becomes an unfortunate sort of conundrum if you don't have it.
It's interesting because a lot of people, when they enter their late teens or 20s, they tend to explore and step away from religion altogether. You hear the term used, the nuns a lot, saying how that's growing here very fast here in the United States. Then you may have some who say they're spiritual but not religious. What made you continue to stay connected with religious practice versus saying, you know what, I want to step away from this and just see what else is out there?
I think what really resonated with me from both my traditions was this understanding that the light of God or the divine existed within all things. It's one thing to sort of be exposed to the idea and be forced to sort of be a part of the tradition over time. But it became a different experience for me when my parents gave me the open choice to be a part of any religious or spiritual community that I want to, or if I wanted to become atheist or agnostic, I completely had that ability to choose for myself. And over time, because I had the opportunity to study and really go in depth in places that I didn't before, and even went as far as to work with colleagues and friends who exposed me to different faith traditions, it made me stronger in my understanding of the ones that I grew up in, and I fell in love with them more and more, and they just became a part of everything that I am.
Okay. So college life, what drew you to, I guess, did it start for you in college, the activist side? Did that start from college or high school?
My sort of activism started in college, but my yearning to be a part of this movement started in high school. I actually was going to go down a typical path and become a doctor, but I realized that the medical field didn't resonate with me as much as my love for communicating with people did. And over time, in realizing the lack of communication between communities and individuals that was causing so much of the polarity that we see sort of magnetized today, is a deep part of why I do the work that I do. I really started my activism work in 2012 after the Oak Creek, Wisconsin Gurdwara shooting that took place when a white supremacist went into a Sikh temple and shot at the congregation during services. It was a conundrum for my American identity and for my religious and ethnic identity that how could someone walk into a place of worship like that and attack a group of people that he had confused for the Muslim community? And that itself was an epiphany for me. First, most people didn't know about the Sikh community and started asking questions and learning the basics. Second, there was a lot of this push in the media that Sikhs were not Muslim, as if it was okay to change the target of folks who were being dehumanized and discriminated against. And third, from a very deep personal part of me, if there's a community that is my own that gets attacked, I will have a greater tendency to act for them more on the front lines. And I came to the conclusion that I don't want to fall into the narrative of fear or hatred towards the white supremacists, but to show greater solidarity and compassion to every community that's being marginalized and discriminated against.
So after college life, what is it like now for you? Like being like a young adult versus like a youth. What does that look like, being an activist doing this work, being able to sustain yourself? What is that like? And still have your practice?
It's certainly not an easy process, but it's a very fulfilling one, I would say. I've gotten to a point where my experience with interfaith work is deeply enriching and rewarding just for the work, but it's not necessarily the most financially sustainable. And I kind of have to learn to deal with that accordingly. I've been invited to speak in a variety of different places. I've been working on numerous projects across the board, from the Reimagining Interfaith conference taking place in DC to stuff with the Parliament of the World's Religions in different capacities, to working on more local projects here in Southern California. And that, for me, is sort of a work in progress. I kind of try to figure it out as it goes. But being in the spaces of interfaith have always been one of the most fascinating things for me, because being someone that's 26 and involved in this work professionally throws a lot of people off. I think the median age of most of the people that I work with is around 55, and it's definitely more of an average that's up into the 60s. And a lot of the times, because of this youth savviness that I have, quote unquote, I'm able to work on a lot of the nitty-gritty administrative or logistical stuff behind the scenes. And some people might think that I don't necessarily qualify otherwise, that I don't have the theological depth or wisdom that one would anticipate from someone my age. But sure enough, that narrative has been changing a lot because of the role that young adults have in the 21st century, and particularly with big instances like the Parkland shooting that took place that created the March for Our Lives movement. That was a big thing for people that were under 35, because we suddenly became leaders, because leadership was something we had to claim, we didn't have to wait for.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's go back to Reimagining Interfaith. Can you explain more what that is, please?
Yeah, sure. Reimagining Interfaith is a conference that's being done in collaboration with about 24 organizations that are focusing on the elephant of the interfaith movement. It's talking about how these roots of privilege, of injustice that is systemic and individual, and the opportunity to talk about taboo subjects can really be put onto this pedestal. We're trying to find out, what are we doing wrong? How can we admit we're doing something wrong? And how can we make it better? Mm-hmm. And that really means collaborating across different communities and coming to a common space to really discuss the reality of the changing landscape of religion and spirituality, the changing way of how religion and spirituality are deeply rooted in all parts of society, even in the places where we least expect it or don't want it, and more importantly, how to build that productive relationship across the board so we can engage in pluralism in the most truthful way possible.
Mm-hmm. So what do you personally, as someone who's involved with this meeting that's coming up, what do you personally want to see be achieved from it?
Man, I wish I could say a lot. But to keep it simple, I just want to be in a space where my existence, my identity, and my voice are not just valid or appreciated, but they're put in a place where people can learn. The work that I've done already for this conference behind the scenes is joined with so many other young folks and leaders from the interfaith movement. And the fact that we can see ourselves as equals, as co-partners, and as colleagues with many of our people who we see as mentors really means a lot more to us than being given the opportunity to do these little things here and there and get sort of a round of applause of sorts. It's deeply saying that we are equals and we have our unique wisdoms as younger folks that we don't need to bring to the table, that we've already brought to the table.
Mm-hmm. What advice do you give to faith-based organizations and religious communities to get young professionals engaged in either their faith community or a faith community or doing interfaith work?
I think the best advice I can give is don't involve a young person because they're just tech savvy. We kind of have to be tech savvy with anything that we do in terms of developing a nonprofit or faith-based organization. And inevitably, we have to catch up with the times if we want to attract new communities and individuals to get involved. So that actually means looking at the strengths of these young people and what they can bring to the table, and giving them their due space and time to be able to voice it and create initiatives or projects around it. If we learned anything from the major issues that are impacting us now, whether we talk about immigration, whether we talk about gun violence, or whether we talk about many of the civil strife issues in the Middle East, in South Asia, and in other places around the world, let alone here in the United States, we know young people are already taking the leadership they need to create demonstrations, to help feed those who are in need, to protect the voiceless. And they go and get those leaderships for themselves. When we're in a place where there's an established infrastructure for a community or an organization, it is very easy to make the room. It is much harder to leave communities out of the conversation than it is to put them into it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One thing I keep hearing sometimes in religious communities is that the reason they don't reach out to young professionals or young people is basically a financial issue, because they also see sometimes that young professionals or students, they're not bringing in, like, I guess, the kind of tithes or donations, what have you, to come into these communities. But the flip side of that is because they're not doing that type of outreach. When you start looking at generational shifts in your church, the older members are passing away, they're moving away because of retirement and so forth. You end up in a lot of cases having a massive generational gap. Do you think there's some bias there because they don't want to reach out to young people because of that whole financial piece? Or is it a situation in the case where young people can say, hey, I don't know what you're going to do with that tithe I give you. I can donate to a nonprofit that's overseas, like doing healthcare work. I see where that money is going there. Why would I want to come to your faith community and I don't know what you're going to do with it? What can be done about those kind of things where I guess the older generation has that kind of thought in their mind that because they don't see young people as being able to provide that kind of financial piece to it, how can that be shifted too? Because it's not necessarily that there could be young people who can write big checks too, but there's still that piece where they feel like sometimes young people can't really be able, I guess, contribute financially to the running of the church or whatever faith community it is.
You're absolutely right. I totally understand that experience because that's understandably something that I've been going through. I know that I can't write a big check to major interfaith organizations because I don't have the financial sustainability to take care of myself or my family. And that's a deep part of why a lot of other folks that are younger than 35 get deterred from doing this work in the first place. But if we don't have the opportunity to donate money, we certainly have the time to give energy, to give momentum, to give opportunity, and to give new ideas. And those are things that have to be an integral part of any organization if they wanted to develop. What you addressed in terms of people aging out and aging in, I mean, that's just how life works. I mean, you kind of got to deal with it in a productive way. And to keep young people out just because they can't afford a membership or give a sustainable donation is kind of a slap in the face, honestly, because there are so many folks that can find opportunities to do something tangible, which is a very big thing for young adults that we don't really find in giving donations to organizations. And that's kind of why we get deterred from certain ones that just look for that monetary stakeholder role rather than trying to use them for the best energy or the best momentum that they bring to a process. What a person can bring sort of financially, they can't necessarily bring in answering something from an emergency response or in trying to put a major volunteer drive or project together. So we need to learn how to balance that out. If there's energy in the blood and the sweat that goes into the hard work, that hard work has to answer for so many different things in making sure that these organizations can survive in the next 5, 10, 15 years and beyond.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious from your perspective on that. Let's see. Going to things back happening in California. You have any big initiatives happening right now, or did anything take place recently out in the
Well, there are a couple of different things going on here. With the support of the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles, myself as well as my colleagues Sable Manson and Tahil are a part of a new project that was established by the Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles to become interfaith ministers in residence. And we're being given the task to consolidate the interfaith network here in Southern California, which is so strong, it's so diverse, but it's pretty disconnected when you visit certain counties and cities throughout the area. And we have the opportunity to sort of reunite people in a new and an invigorating way, where people can see each other for the resources they have and create a more resilient movement here.
Okay. So what are the next steps you see for young people in this movement?
Well, I think the first step that I would sort of look into is reaching out to the organizations that they feel like would use their time and energy well. I think when it comes to this kind of participation in interfaith work, we're not necessarily in it for the money a lot of the time, but at the same time, interest is a two-way street. Just as much as organizations need people to be a part of their leadership and their networks to build the momentum, there also needs to be an interest from young folks who are willing to enter a zone of discomfort or a place where they can transform themselves by engaging with people that have different views from them. And we need to make sure that those roads keep being traveled on, because at the end of the day, polarity has not improved in any way. The current politics, and not just here in the United States, but around the world, haven't made it easier to have communication between folks that think differently, let alone do things differently. And in a space like interfaith, we have to be very clear that we are not a kumbaya movement. There are elements of kumbaya that help unite us and recognize unity and diversity, but when push comes to shove, we need to show that disagreement is okay, that we can transform from that disagreement, and that across those differences, we have an integrity and accountability towards each other to make the world a better place.
So I got another one for you. You know, in the movement, this is what I've noticed. You have the academia, you have the policy folks, and then you have people who do the work I do that's more like entertainment, kind of like set up here in the studio. How can these three different entities also enhance the work that's going on and make it more interesting and engaging?
I think the biggest thing that all three of those sectors need to realize is their center point is intersection. And that's deeply important in the conversation of how inclusive we have to be when it comes to interfaith work. I'll address an elephant in the room right now that a lot of people of color are not involved in this movement. And it's becoming a thing that's difficult to handle when it comes to understanding what interfaith actually means in a true context. For some people, interfaith is extending only beyond certain denominations of Christianity, and for some it doesn't go beyond the realm of the Abrahamic faith. And we kind of have to deal with each of those contexts accordingly, because they face different struggles and they have different solutions. But it's very important that in sectors of privilege like academia, like legislation, and like dealing with the media, if we want to be inclusive of folks that are religious, philosophical, spiritual, and atheistic or secular, we need to be mindful that it has to not just be that diversity, but that diversity impacts all other forms of diversity. We need to have different folks of color. We need to have different folks of socioeconomic status. We need to have different folks that come from different journeys in life that are not of privilege. And that privilege can show itself in many ways, but these are institutions that have a tendency to elevate privilege to a level where it can't access common people, and we really need to change that.
So that just requires a key thing of no longer being insular, not
Right.
only within your own denominations or faith communities, but even in the segments of your networks. It's required like to get out and reach out to the different groups.
Yes, and it's also not being insular to doing everything your way and being
Right.
the only way that everything functions. You need to step out of your box and realize that you have a valid idea, you have a valid suggestion or a valid opinion, but it's not something that everyone shares, which means people can learn the insight that you give, but you need to have an equal accountability to learn from their insight and to grow yourself.
Okay, and if anyone wants to get in touch with you, find out more about Reimagining Interfaith, all the stuff you have going on, how can they reach out to you?
People can reach out to me on Facebook by researching my name, TahilSharma. They can search me up on Instagram or Twitter at Interfaith Man, which is pretty simple. And if people want to know more about the conference in DC this summer, we only have a couple of days left for registration, but they can go to reimagineinterfaith.org and search up and register.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tahil, for coming on the show today. I appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your perspective about being a young adult, coming from an interfaith family, and the work you're doing.
Thank you so much, Jackie, and thank you to everyone watching.
All right, yeah, you're welcome. And thank you for watching Interfaith Connections. For more information, you can check our website at www.interfaithconnections.com. You can follow us on Twitter at www.twitter.com/IFC TV show, or you can like us on Facebook. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.